What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 10 side deck cards going into the February 2020 format. So as the format is starting to solidify and we're starting to see which decks are the front runners, which I brought to you in my competitive tier list video yesterday, now we can start to see which cards are going to be the most effective when we go into games 2 and 3, because you do play more games with your side deck than you do with your main deck. So your side deck is almost in a lot of ways more important than your main deck. So I want to go ahead and give you guys my top picks for the side deck, so that way you guys can be the best prepared if you're going to a regional, a YCS, what have you, and have the best chance of success. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now the first card on my list is Droll and Lockbird. Now honestly, if you're going into a really competitive event, I would probably be main decking this card just simply due to the fact that Spiral is the deck that has the target on its back, and Droll and Lockbird is one of the few cards that can actually just completely cripple a Spiral player's turn if they don't have something like, let's say, Called by the Grave to be able to stop it. Droll and Lockbird is so good at just ending players' turns with decks that rely so heavily on searching, and it's not too bad against some of the other matchups as well, just depending on how you look at it, because obviously it's Yu-Gi-Oh! There is a ton of searching that goes on, but it is better against some decks versus others. I mean, obviously when you look at decks like, say, something like Altergeist, for instance, Droll and Lockbird doesn't really hurt that deck too much, just because it really only adds like 1 or 2 cards to hand per turn, so it obviously is going to have poor matchups as well. But when you're looking in terms of like what the best deck is going into this format, Droll and Lockbird is looking like a pretty solid 3 of. The next card I have on this list is DD Crow. Now again, very similar to Droll and Lockbird, a lot of people are opting to main deck DD Crow, not necessarily in the same impact that it has against a deck like Spiral, but because it has wider application against a lot of the top decks. I mean, when you're looking at Spiral, yes, it has some really good application because there are a lot of cards that Spiral uses to resurrect from the graveyard. We've got stuff like Spiral Mission Rescue, you've got Big Red, you've got Monster Reborn, so a well-timed DD Crow can actually be the Spiral player's demise, depending on what point at the combo you hit them at. But you also have the fact that when you look at other top meta decks like, say, Salamangreat, DD Crow has always been very good at hitting Salamangreat's key cards, and if you're able to slow that deck down before it gets set up with like its Heat Leo, or excuse me, its Sunlight Wolf, as well as a few traps, then you're gonna be looking pretty good. You can set up your own board at that point, and you should be able to further just take the game from that point. Now again, similar to DD Crow, there are going to be matchups where the card is not good, and I think that's going to be the case for a lot of cards, but I think DD Crow has a little bit more wider application when you look at just the totality of all the different matchups compared to something like Droll and Lockbird. But I think Droll and Lockbird is going to be a lot more high impact when you compare it to what matchups it's good against versus something like DD Crow. DD Crow might be a little bit lesser of an impact, but it could be enough in most cases to help steal you a win. Keeping on track with the hand trap-esque cards, I have Nibiru. Now, Nibiru is a bit of an odd one because when you look at it compared to a deck like Spiral, Nibiru isn't the best option. Sure, there are moments that hitting a well-timed Nibiru against Spiral will win you the game, but there are a lot of instances though with Spiral that they're actually able to play through the Nibiru, not to mention they are able to assemble an Appaloosa rather early in their combos, and if that's the case, Nibiru gets completely shut down unless you have something like Infinite Impermanence plus Nibiru to be able to negate that Appaloosa. But when you look at Nibiru in the greater context of some of the other meta matchups, it's actually pretty good against some of the other decks too. There's other combo decks in the format, like, let's say, Danger Lunalight, even against Salamangreat. Like, the Nibiru's still really good, even though Mirage Stalio is banned, and it's still a really big card for the Salamangreat player to get over. So it's also a 3K body. You really can't let that go be taken for granted, and there's a lot of cool things you can do with that as well. So I decided to leave Nibiru on here because it is still seeing tons of play, and you should expect that, you know, your opponent probably has a 50-50 shot of playing this card. But a lot of people have been leaving Nibiru behind for another big rock, being the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode. Now, Sphere Mode is better compared to Nibiru, at least in the context of Spiral, for a couple reasons, right? The first reason is because if you draw Sphere Mode as your 6th card, which, to be fair, is probably not likely to happen against Spiral, considering the fact that they're always going to use Drone to rearrange the top of your deck. However, if you happen to draw it as your 6th card against, like, other combo decks, let's say, then it's going to be live, whereas Nibiru won't be because you have to have it in your hand on turn 0 to be able to activate it. Sphere Mode's also one of the rare cards that can also just clean up a Spiral board entirely. You can just tribute over something like their Appaloosa and said, their sleeper, and you could go for Trigate, but it's already disabled at that point, so maybe go for like Nightmare Phoenix just so you can kill things in battle, I suppose, and the board's cleaned up, and then you have 4 or 5 other cards in your hand to be able to do whatever the hell you want with. Sure, you do have to deal with the sphere mode eventually, but if you clear up their board, I mean, they pretty much had to exhaust a ton of their resources to even get to that point, and the deck isn't completely out of commission. It does have recovery plays thanks to cards like Double Helix, but you've pretty much put a pretty big damper on their plays, and you should be looking pretty good overall. So sphere mode, definitely a card you should expect to see a lot more of, and if you're playing a combo deck, definitely a card you need to be mindful of. Moving on to the spell cards. First up, we have Dark Ruler No More. Now, this really shouldn't come as a surprise. Again, we're talking Spiral, we're talking about versus the combo decks. This card's incredible, right? Being able to negate the effects of all the face-up monsters the opponent controls. It doesn't matter that you can't do damage to them. The fact that you now have the ability to start breaking their board and actually just get in a winning position is really all you need. It's kind of like with Soul Charge, right? Yeah, sure, you skip your battle phase, but you just overwhelm them with card advantage. And again, you do have to play it in a specific deck that can consistently break the Spiral board, but with everything being negated on the opponent's field, it definitely gets a lot easier. So definitely a very solid pick. Again, not even just for Spiral, but a lot of the combo decks in general. It's a pretty solid card overall. There's also Super Poly if you're fancying to do something a little bit different than Dark Ruler if you're just trying to get those cards off the board. You also have the potential to gain some advantage because of whatever you discard off Super Poly. So even though it does have that discard cost, there's plenty of ways to mitigate that with like dangers or anything that just has graveyard synergy. That works pretty well. And then again, when it comes to Super Poly, it's a little bit more limiting because you have to be playing a deck that doesn't necessarily rely on extra deck space so that you can play those Super Poly targets. You know, that Starving Venom, that Mud Dragon, that World Chalice Guard Dragon Almarduk. I do not know how to pronounce it, but the big fusion guy that you can summon by fusing 3 Link monsters, which just so happens to be just how many Link monsters the Spiral board will put out. So when it comes to it, Super Poly is still a pretty strong card, not just against Spiral, but against a lot of other matchups as well, and the fact you can't respond to it will still be the bane of everyone's existence. Now, I gotta admit, I kind of cheated on this next part here because we are still in the spell cards, but it's 3 cards that all kind of do the same thing, but it's just depending on what you're going for, which one you'd want to use. So those cards are Twin Twister, Cosmic Cyclone, and Mystical Space Typhoon. Twin Twister obviously being the most popular option of the 3. Cosmic Cyclone's nice because it banishes instead of destroying, which can be relevant in certain matchups, and Mystical Space Typhoon, again, just depending on what you're going for. If you don't want to have that discard that Twin Twister has, or if you don't want to pay the 1,000 life points that comes with Cosmic Cyclone, Mystical Space Typhoon's like kind of like a middle ground that some decks do opt to play. Not very often. It was kind of more of like a Sky Striker card, but it does still see play from time to time. But these are just your generic spell and trap removal. The things I really like about these is that they're good for going second, but it's also good when you go first to set them as a back row card, and then if your opponent sets back row of their own or activates like a field spell, different things like that, you can just flip them, use them as a defensive tool instead of a card to help break your opponent's board and push through offensively. So really well-designed cards and definitely good solid picks for your side deck. And then we have the mother of all back row removal now, the brand new Lightning Storm. Yes, this card is going to see tons of side deck play because not only does it destroy all spells and traps your opponent controls, it has a dual function that it can destroy all face-up attack position monsters your opponent controls as well. And that's insanely powerful. The fact you get to choose one or the other. Sure, you can't control any face-up cards when you activate it, but does that really matter? The fact that you get to basically Harpy's Feather Duster or like pseudo Regeki the board. In so many instances, Lightning Storm can combo with other cards to be able to break opponents' combo boards, and then you're free to do whatever you want with the remaining 4 cards in your hand. This card is very, very powerful. Do not underestimate it, and is going to see a ton of play. And last but not least, I want to make sure I touch on the trap card. So first up, we have Evenly Matched. Honestly, you can make the argument that Evenly Matched could go in the main deck this format, just because when you look at all the different matchups that you could possibly go up against, if you happen to lose the die roll, but hey, you drew into Evenly Matched, you could probably just win the game because you drew that Evenly Matched and decided to include it in your main deck. But a lot of people are still opting to side it just so they know when they guarantee that they go second that that is the case. But there are still a lot of going second decks running around that might want to just main deck it regardless. The card is just incredibly powerful. It banishes everything, and as long as you can bait out a single Trigate negation, or in most instances when it comes to the combo decks, 1 spell and trap negation, then you're able to just completely wipe the board. Yeah, sure, you may still have to deal with like a sleeper, but like that's a small price to pay for having a single card be able to deal with an entire Spiral board. We used this card back in 2017 in Spiral format, and it's no surprise that we're seeing it here again. So definitely pick up your Evenly evenly matched if you don't have them already, and be prepared, if, depending on the deck that you're playing, you might be seeing this card a lot. And the last card I want to touch on is actually a card that you guys might not expect to see on this list, but it's actually a pointer of the Red Lotus. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh god, here Cimoooooooo goes again with the pointer of the Red Lotus. Now, here's the thing. This card is still very, very good in the right situation, and this is actually one of those times where a pointer of the Red Lotus is viable in my eyes. So why is that? Well, if you're playing a combo deck, let's say you're going into game 2, and you know you're going first. When you assemble your board, if your deck has the potential to access the Nightmare Griffin combo, you could potentially just set the Pointer of the Red Lotus, and that way you have like free access to it. So you only really need to side deck one copy, but you obviously could side deck multiples if you want to hard open it. Now the thing is, when it comes to a Pointer of the Red Lotus specifically, let's take a card like Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode, which we talked about earlier. Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode doesn't exactly have a hard counter aside from a card like a Pointer of the Red Lotus. So if you have your board, if you're playing, let's say, a spiral deck or a combo deck of any kind, and you think to yourself, well, the only card they have to have here is Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode for me to lose. If you're playing a Pointer of the Red Lotus, not only do you get to see their hand to know that they have the Sphere Mode, you get to banish it until the end of their turn. And that's so good because most likely that's going to be their only out to your board, and then you probably just won yourself the game because on the next turn you can probably just kill them. It's a way to out a card like Sphere Mode, and there really is no other card that can do that. It also can take out stuff like Evenly Matched, like Dark Ruler No More. If you're a combo player and you're trying to just find ways to stop these like 1 or 2 card outs that people are playing to break your board, a Pointer of the Red Lotus can actually get you there. It has a steep cost of 2,000 life points and showing your opponent every card in your hand, but honestly, all the relevant cards are probably going to be known anyway if you're playing combo, and I think that's a fair price to pay to not lose to Sphere Mode. So guys, that's going to wrap up the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about any other side deck picks you have for the February 2020 competitive format. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.